8,000 kilometers from the Persian Gulf, buried under Alberta's boreal forest, sits the third largest proven oil reserve on Earth. For decades, it had nowhere to go. When Houthi militants choked the Red Sea corridor in late 2023, global crude markets convulsed. Tanker insurance premiums tripled. Refineries across Asia scrambled for alternative supply. And somewhere in Vancouver, a pipeline terminal that barely existed 12 months earlier quietly began redirecting the trajectory of Canadian sovereignty. To understand why that moment mattered, you need to see the trap it broke. Here's the suffocating math. In 2024, Canada exported 4.2 million barrels of crude per day. Of that, 95.7%, 4.0 million barrels, flowed to a single customer, the United States. According to Canada Energy Regulator data, nearly every major pipeline, every rail terminal, every piece of export infrastructure pointed one direction, south. That architecture had a price. Without alternative buyers, Canadian heavy crude, Western Canadian Select, sold at chronic discounts. CIBC's 2025 analysis puts the average gap at 11 to 14 US dollars per barrel below WTI, with historical spikes hitting 20. Multiply that across millions of barrels every day for years, billions in national revenue, quietly surrendered by geography alone. For decades, Canada's oil had only one real destination. Then almost overnight, that entire assumption cracked when a country 8,000 kilometers away started pulling barrels from Vancouver instead of the Middle East. Over the next 18 minutes, we're mapping exactly how one pipeline and a series of global fractures handed Canada the keys to sovereign pricing power. It starts with a piece of infrastructure most Canadians still dismiss as a budget line item, the physical escape hatch from a trap that cost this country more than anyone was willing to count. The Trans Mountain Expansion. According to Canada's Parliamentary Budget Officer, the final price tag landed at 34.2 billion Canadian dollars, nearly triple the earliest projections and far beyond even the revised 21.4 billion estimate. Every Oaksway headline screamed the financial catastrophe. Wall Street piled on, noting the pipeline couldn't even accommodate VLCC supertankers, the global industry standard. Shipments were restricted to Aframax-class vessels, roughly 550,000 barrels per load. Smaller ships, higher per barrel costs, less competitive on paper against every major exporting nation. So why would a government keep writing checks on infrastructure the market had already declared dead? Because that $34 billion bought something no spreadsheet can price. A key. Before TMX, Canada's Western oil export system moved roughly 300,000 barrels per day, virtually all of it flowing south into the U.S. through pipelines locked to continental pricing. No coastline access, no tanker loading capability, no alternative buyer at scale. That landlocked geography is exactly where the WCS discount we just discussed lives and breathes. On May 1st, 2024, TMX went operational. Capacity jumped from 300,000 to roughly 890,000 barrels per day, nearly tripled. And critically, it reached tidewater, the Pacific coast, Vancouver's Westridge marine terminal. For the first time in the history of Canadian oil, crude could physically leave North America by sea at meaningful volume. The bottleneck didn't loosen, it broke. Was it over budget? Massively. But consider what that money actually bought. Permanent physical access to every crude market on the Pacific Rim. The structural ability to pick up the phone and sell to someone other than America. A sovereign exit from a trap, hemorrhaging this country tens of billions every year. Here's the catch. A key on its own opens nothing. Inert. It needs a lock worth turning. And in the months surrounding TMX's launch, the old global order was about to crack, violently delivering exactly the kind of geopolitical rupture that would turn this dormant asset into a live weapon. February 1st, 2025, the White House dropped a single fact sheet, 10% tariff targeted directly at Canadian energy imports. Just like that. The assumption that had quietly underpinned decades of Canadian energy strategy, frictionless, guaranteed access to the largest market on Earth, evaporated overnight. The wall wasn't theoretical anymore. It was policy, signed, stamped, and enforced. And the timing? Almost cruel. TMX had barely begun operating. Canada had just finished building the physical escape route from its single buyer trap. And now Washington was handing it every reason to actually use it. But that was only the first domino. 13 months later. February 28th, 2026. War erupted in Iran. Within 72 hours, the Strait of Hormuz, that narrow choke point carrying roughly 20% of the world's daily oil supply, was effectively shut down. The most critical energy artery on the planet went dark. Now think about what that means for a country like South Korea, a manufacturing powerhouse, one of the most advanced industrial economies in Asia. And brutally exposed. Historically, between 61 and 70% of its total crude imports depended entirely on safe passage through that exact strait. That now paralyzed bottleneck wasn't just a supply line, it was the supply line, and it had just been severed. Picture it. Refineries in Ulsan running countdown clocks on their strategic reserves, trading desks in Seoul pulling all-nighters, scrambling for any barrel on Earth that could arrive without threading through an active war zone. Forget price swings. This was an existential supply emergency. And here's what made the moment structurally devastating. These two forces didn't arrive one after the other. They stacked. The U.S. erected a tariff wall just as the Middle East caught fire. Canada's old default market walled off by policy. The world's old default supply route walled off by war. The only remaining direction for Canadian crude to flow was west, through TMX across the Pacific. That pipeline, the one critics had called a $34 billion boondoggle, was suddenly the only open artery connecting one of the world's largest hydrocarbon reserves to the most desperate buyers on Earth. But when those Asian trading desks finally picked up the phone and dialed Canada, friendship had absolutely nothing to do with it. This was cold, absolute survival arithmetic. $69.70. That was the delivered price of a barrel of Canadian crude landing in South Korea during the crisis. American crude? $77.50. Saudi barrels? $75.96. According to Vortexa data, the arbitrage spread ran $6 to $10 per barrel. For a refinery processing hundreds of thousands of barrels a day, that gap translates into millions in immediate savings per week. The spreadsheet made the decision before any handshake ever happened. But price was only the first column. Imagine you're an energy procurement director at a major Korean refinery. One option on your screen is a tanker crawling through the Strait of Hormuz, 40 kilometers wide. 20% of the world's oil squeezed through it, and right now it's a live conflict zone. Your vessel needs a military escort. Insurance premiums have tripled. Delivery timelines are a guess, not a guarantee. You're tracking that ship the way a parent tracks a teenager who missed curfew, every hour, checking, waiting, calculating what happens if it doesn't arrive. Now look at the other option. A crude carrier departs the Westridge Marine Terminal in Burnaby, British Columbia, and charts a course directly across the open Pacific toward Busan. According to Wood Mackenzie and Argus Media, that vessel bypasses every single flashpoint. No Hormuz, no Red Sea, no Suez Canal, no military escort required. The only thing between Burnaby and Busan is water. Quiet, stable, uncontested water. So what Canada was suddenly offering the most energy-desperate buyers on Earth came down to three things at once. A $6 to $10 per barrel price advantage, massive physical availability through a brand new pipeline terminal, and a shipping route that touches zero conflict zones. In supply chain terms, that combination has a name. It's called an unbeatable bid. And the market validated it at extraordinary speed. According to Discovery Alert and Vortexa tracking data, Canadian crude exports to South Korea rocketed from essentially zero to 411 million Canadian dollars within a 17-month window, May 2024 through September 2025. The corporations that moved first were not small players: HD Hyundai Oil Bank, SK Energy, GS Caltex. These industrial giants didn't test the waters with token purchases. They initiated massive physical evaluation runs, batches of 300,000 to 548,000 barrels at a time. Full-scale operational commitments. While global oil markets screamed in headline panic, while insurance underwriters shredded their risk models and naval commanders repositioned carrier groups across two oceans, something far quieter was happening at the Westridge Marine Terminal. Ships were loading steadily, methodically, on schedule. No drama, no diplomacy, just infrastructure executing exactly what it was built to do. Now, everything you've just heard is a supply chain story. Barrels moving from point A to point B at a better price on a safer road. Impressive, yes, but keep watching, because that $6 to $10 arbitrage spread started doing something no Canadian energy policy had managed in over 40 years. It began dismantling the structural price discount that had quietly drained this country of billions in sovereign wealth year after year after year. And that rewrites more than a balance sheet. It rewrites Canada's position on the map. Within months of TMX reaching operational scale, exports to non-US destinations tripled, not grew modestly, tripled. And the buyer composition tells you everything. China absorbed roughly 70% of those new non-US volumes. Immediate, strategic, aggressive. But pay closer attention to the other 30%. Japan and South Korea, two of the most energy vulnerable industrial economies on the planet, depend on Middle Eastern crude for roughly 95% of their oil imports per CGAI analysis, cross-referenced with the CER's September 20 market snapshot. For decades, every barrel they purchased transited through or dangerously near the Strait of Hormuz, the single most militarized choke point in global shipping. Canadian crude arriving at Pacific terminals rewrote their risk calculus overnight. Now shift your lens. Forget commodity trading. What Canada just delivered to Tokyo and Seoul is a conflict-free hedge, a physical insurance policy against the exact geopolitical disruption that keeps their defense planners awake. That transforms Canada from a commercial vendor into something far more valuable, a strategic hedging partner embedded in the security architecture of the Indo-Pacific. And diplomatic weight of that kind compounds quietly. Every barrel that docks in Busan or Yokohama without transiting a war zone is a deposit into a sovereign relationship account that pays interest in trade negotiations, defense cooperation, and multilateral leverage for decades. Now here's where the economics lock this in permanently. The compounding cycle works in 3 stages. Stage 1, alternative routes kill the discount. For years, Western Canadian Select traded at an average discount of $8.70 per barrel below WTI. That gap existed for a single reason: captive supply. When your only customer knows you have nowhere else to go, they name the price. Post TMX, that structural discount compressed to roughly $12 per barrel per the CER September 2025 market snapshot. This is not a temporary blip. It is a permanent repricing driven by genuine route diversification. Stage 2, the recovered margin stays home. That $6.70 narrowing multiplied across hundreds of thousands of barrels per day translates into billions annually that no longer leak out of the Canadian economy as a quiet subsidy to U.S. Gulf Coast refiners. Billions now flowing into provincial revenues, federal coffers, and reinvestment capacity. Stage 3, and this is the one that breaks the satellite model for good, retained capital funds the next wave of sovereign diversification, more terminal capacity, more bilateral trade agreements, more downstream processing at home. Each dollar reinvested widens the buyer pool, which further compresses the discount, which retains more capital. The flywheel accelerates. Every single rotation makes the old dependency structure less reversible. And that is the proof. Once Canadian oil had a way to reach the Pacific at scale, it didn't need to wait for demand to appear. It just needed the right moment for the market to notice. So step back. Look at what TMX actually is, a single piece of infrastructure that simultaneously outflanks U.S. border tariffs by giving Canadian crude a Pacific exit and sidesteps Middle Eastern choke points by offering Asian buyers a clean, direct northern route. 1 pipeline. 2 geopolitical problems neutralized. That is a geographic shield. And Canada activated it at the precise moment, the old continental bargain. The quiet assumption that North American trade would remain frictionless, borderless, mutually beneficial forever, began to fracture. Not temporarily, structurally. The cracks are not healing, they are load-bearing. And what is emerging on the other side of that fracture changes every assumption you hold about the Canadian-American economic relationship. So what does that fracture look like when you zoom in? Start with the trade architecture itself. For 30 years, Canadian industry operated on one foundational assumption: proximity to the American market guaranteed privileged access. The border was formality, a speed bump, not a wall. That assumption shaped investment decisions, supply chain design, entire generations of trade policy. And Washington is now dismantling it deliberately, methodically, with zero ambiguity about the end game. U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer stated it in terms that leave no room for diplomatic spin. Tariffs are no longer a temporary negotiating tactic. They are, in his words, something Canada will have to accept as a permanent feature of doing business with the United States. Permanent feature. He's describing the new price of admission to your largest trading partner. And the price is non-negotiable. The targeting is surgical. Washington's core objective is to aggressively rewrite CUSMA's rules of origin, zeroing in on what Greer categorized as screwdriver operations. These are loopholes where countries like China or Vietnam route goods through Canada with minimal local processing, slap on a Made in North America label, and skate past tariff walls. The American response? Treat the entire Canadian supply chain as guilty until proven otherwise. Every cross-border component now carries a question mark, and here's where the permanence becomes impossible to dismiss. When a broad set of initial U.S. tariffs was struck down by the Supreme Court as unconstitutional, the administration didn't retreat. It moved almost immediately to enforce a new 10% levy using an entirely different legal mechanism. One legal door shut, another swung open within weeks, aimed directly at its northern neighbor. That single maneuver tells you more than any press conference. The protectionist doctrine will outlive court rulings, election cycles, and diplomatic photo ops. The intent is structural. It is locked in. Now connect this to what we just covered. Canada's sprint toward energy diversification through TMX, the pivot to Asian buyers, the $6.70 compression of the WCS discount, none of that was aspirational strategy. It was survival infrastructure laid down in real time. Canada was building lifeboats because the ship of continental free trade was already listing hard. The tariffs didn't create the crisis. They confirmed the diagnosis. The U.S. was constructing a wall around its domestic economy, and proximity, even formal alliance, no longer buys you a door. We grew up assuming the U.S.-Canada economic border was essentially invisible. Trade flowed like water between neighbors who'd never dream of installing locks. Now that entry carries a firm, permanent price tag. And you have to ask yourself, honestly, is this forced independence exactly what our economy needed to finally grow up? What's emerging from this rupture looks nothing like defeat. Canada is assembling a posture it has never attempted at scale, a deliberate, multipolar defensive stance, and the strategic blueprint behind it changes every assumption about where this country is headed. I want your read on that. Drop it in the comments. The first move is already on the table. Innovation Minister François-Philippe Champagne stripped away any remaining diplomatic ambiguity when he declared publicly, "Every country around the world now understands there's a price to enter the U.S. market." That single sentence buried the old reliance illusion. Ottawa is no longer negotiating from the assumption of a preferential relationship. It's treating American market access as a cost center, meaning every dollar spent navigating U.S. tariff barriers is a dollar that could build sovereign capacity elsewhere, and rerouting capital accordingly. The second move, supply chain surgery, executed at speed. When legacy partners like GM and Stellantis began cutting Canadian jobs under direct U.S. tariff pressure, Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly didn't wait for a domestic policy cycle to run its course. She flew to Berlin, sat down with Volkswagen, and signed an auto manufacturing memorandum, engineering non-NAFTA supply chains and European capital inflows from scratch. State-directed industrial realignment happening in real time. And this pattern is scaling well beyond autos. European manufacturing partnerships are opening capital corridors that bypass North American tariff exposure entirely. On the energy side, LNG export capacity on the Pacific coast is being positioned to serve Indo-Pacific buyers, markets actively seeking stable, diversified supply at exactly the moment when Red Sea shipping chaos has exposed the fragility of traditional routes through Suez. Asian trade corridors that barely registered on Ottawa's diplomatic map 5 years ago are being formalized through bilateral frameworks. Each new agreement isn't a thread in some abstract web. It's a load-bearing beam in physical infrastructure designed to distribute sovereign risk away from a single, increasingly adversarial market. Now pull back. See the full architecture. Middle East shipping chaos didn't break Canada. Permanent tariffs didn't break Canada. The collapse of Kuzma's frictionless fantasy didn't break Canada. What these compounding forces actually achieved was something no domestic policy agenda could have delivered on its own. A structural acceleration of economic sovereignty. With TMX operational, the WCS discount has compressed from $18 to $12. Trade corridors are multiplying. Diplomatic leverage is expanding into regions Ottawa barely engaged a decade ago. This is economic maturity forged under pressure, and it is arriving faster than anyone projected. So here's my ask. If this framework gave you a sharper lens on where Canada is actually headed, if it replaced some of that ambient structural anxiety with genuine strategic clarity, pass it forward. Share it with someone in your professional network who's still reading the old map. Because the diversification window is open now, and the people who understand these shifts early will be the ones positioned when the next disruption lands. The map has changed. Make sure your network knows.